What are maybe some of the top lessons you've learned over the last 14, 15 months?
Well, first of all, I think there's this common saying, companies are bought, not sold. I do think that's real. So I think taking your time to figure that out is totally worth it. But to do that, you had to have earned that. You had to have earned the ability to take, enough time to look through the strategic options. And then the second thing is, any situation, you got to try to be as objective as you can because you do have employees and shareholders and everything. In our case, the market was changing. This consolidation was happening, and I felt it was the right move for the company. I do think there's this element where you could get tied up and maybe that clouds your decision making purely based on your emotions or being tied to something in the past or whatever it may be.
Being a revenue leader, you're dealing with a common challenge: the need to streamline and consolidate your sales operations. The problem arises from the overwhelming amount of information and different systems that don't work well together, creating confusion for customers and making it hard to analyze effectively. Your goal is to find one platform that covers various aspects well, reducing unnecessary work for your sales team while keeping the essential features intact. So what is the key to effective consolidation that will lead to revenue generation? Chris Rothstein, the co-founder and CEO of Groove, and now the SVP of Groove inside of Clary post-acquisition, is the mastermind behind consolidation. In this episode of the Run Revenue Show, Chris shares his secrets on how consolidation provides a closed loop between insight and action, streamlining processes, and increasing productivity. Are you ready to hear what Chris has to say? Stay tuned.
I'm Kyle Coleman, sales pro turned SVP of marketing at Clary. Run Revenue is the show where revenue pros learn to stop revenue leak, achieve revenue precision, and grow their companies and careers.
This is the Run Revenue Show with Kyle Coleman.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special episode of the Run Revenue Show. I'm joined today by my colleague, we can finally say this, Chris Rothstein, the co-founder and CEO of Groove, and now the SVP of Groove inside of Clary post-acquisition. Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Kyle.
Of course. I'll give everybody a little primer first, then we'll jump in to your career. If you're unaware, if you've been living under a rock and you missed the big news of the year, Clary acquired Groove in August of this year in order to bring together all of the revenue critical technology. Clary obviously already has revenue operations and forecasting and analytics and conversation intelligence, but the big missing component of our platform was action and execution, and that's what Groove brings to the table. So we're super excited about that. And we'll talk more about the virtues of having all of those different revenue applications under one roof. But let's start with you, Chris. Talk to us a little bit about who you are, where you've been, kind of the journey you've been on as an entrepreneur, and then how the acquisition actually came to be.
All right, perfect. Grew up in the Midwest, Minnesota to be exact, farmland, very different life. But when I got into technology, and I always loved building businesses, so I actually built a few smaller companies in Minnesota. Then at one point, I decided to go to California for the first time. I saw the Google campus and I said, okay, I got to go there. I applied just on the website, got rejected right away, but was lucky enough to, kind of bother enough people to get in to what now is called Google Cloud. At the time it was called Google Enterprise, a tiny team. I was lucky to get in there when it was, 30 to 50 people probably. And then we were able to, build this out, competing with Microsoft, this entire area, and ran a whole bunch of sales teams. And that's when the idea for Groove actually was kind of started. My co-founder and I both worked there together. We were building sales organizations, and every day we would say, there just has to be a better way. Because the answer was constantly, well, we have Salesforce. We don't have, we have everything we need to solve all of our problems. But I could tell when I walked around, talked to my team, there was so much more we should be doing to really allow them to be the most effective version of themselves and to be the best possible organization. So after 5.5 years, I decided to leave to found Groove. And we really had this mission of how do we help sales reps and the whole organization kind of operate at peak performance the best possible way they could. Removing all the friction was the first step. So how do you just remove all these things they hate doing that are not revenue generating activities? And then after that, we layered in more workflow and so on. Bringing that all together at the acquisition after building grew for about 10 years. We were lucky enough to reach many great milestones, but the market had changed so much. And you realize we were in this, a lot of markets go through a bundling and unbundling phase. We were definitely at the bundling phase for sales tech, where I would constantly talk to buyers and they just had too many solutions. And we always kind of saw that as our vision. Spending more and more time with the Clarity team, I realized, we could accomplish more together, and we could be see a lot of things we want to accomplish at a much bigger scale together and solve more problems for customers together. So that's when we started having conversations, and then we actually partnered for a while to prove it out. And when that was all going well, we said, okay, let's make this happen. So it was an awesome journey overall.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Chris. I can't help but notice that you very conveniently skipped over one of your entrepreneurial ventures, the armadillo, which is a body pillow shaped like an armadillo. It's a story for a different day, but it was one that you told at a dinner we were at one time, and it was just absolutely captivating. But so that's a little seed for people to go and try and Google and see if they can find the armadillo pillow.
It was on the Today Show, Yeah.
So on this note, you mentioned you were speaking to a lot of buyers. You got kind of a read for the market that we are in this bundling, also known as consolidation sort of mandate. And I'm curious, what did you hear from those buyers? What were the pain points that were causing them to say, yes, this bundling of sales tech, revenue tech, this bundling is something we need to do?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is you would get this fatigue where people said, wow, I got so many things. And then there is, let's call it 10, 20% overlap. And that overlap is increasing every day. But the bigger issue is actually, I got to train my reps on so many things. And then when they change roles, I got to learn all this new stuff. And then they're collecting data in different ways, which is the largest part. You have all these point solutions. And when you think about it, any company is thinking about the buyer's journey. They care about delivering value to their customers. And to do that, you got to know, okay, when they're a prospect, this is how we treat them. And when they were in the sales cycle here, and you pass them, through the whole process, so they have this really smooth process. If you're collecting data in different ways and training in different ways and all these different points, and these systems don't talk super well together, it creates this really disjointed experience, which is actually reflected all the way through to your customers, in my opinion. Similar how they say a product organization kind of ships things, or you can see the product organization, how it's reflected in a product. I think it's something similar. If you have this disjointed experience where you have so many solutions that aren't talking to each other, it does create lots of gaps and areas for execution problems. And also it creates a lot of gaps in where you can generate insight, because there's a little bit of insight in all these things, but you need to stitch it together all the way through. Otherwise, it's really hard to have insight. And that's where I felt one platform coming together, covering enough areas, yet being deep enough in each area is very important, because there are a variety of players that tried to consolidate, but they have one core area and then a bunch of areas where they just barely check the box.
Right.
I don't think that's good for customers either, because you're sacrificing too much. Each of the sub areas is too important. So that's where I thought consolidation without compromise, as we say, was critically important.
It's really interesting, Chris, because you just unpacked this whole concept, and not once did you mention cost. And what's so interesting is so many people, especially when there's a tops-down mandate for consolidation, what a lot of companies are thinking about, especially CEOs, CFOs, they're thinking about, well, we need to reduce our spend on tech vendors. And they're not thinking about all the other virtues that you just outlined. So it's really interesting that, yes, tech consolidation will hopefully save you some money, but you can't compromise on all the capabilities that you need your teams to have. And so generating a comprehensive data set to power your workflows, to power your machine learning, power your AI, you need to make sure that you can have just an easy sort of landscape for your admins, like these poor admins that have to try and administer all these different tools that have different roles and hierarchies and permissions. It's just such a nightmare. And so the benefit or the virtue of Clarity plus Groove, hopefully, is that it creates a single platform, capturing data, surfacing those insights in the flow of work, It creates an easy environment for admins to make sure that the right people have the right access to the right features. And also you're saving a little money along the way. This isn't a vision that can just come, in the flash of a pan. How did you and Andy Byrne, our CEO, how did you guys talk about this and realize that there is so much synergy between the companies?
Yeah. For probably 4 or 5 years, I had been talking to my board, I had this graph of these circles coming together, more and more overlap in phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we always looked at this and we said, but at some point you realize each of the pillars was so deep, it was becoming harder and harder to keep up. And then I looked at the whole landscape and I said, who would be a perfect partner for us if we can't build in all these areas? And it was so clear. I told my board, the exact word I used was, it's like 2 perfect puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
Everything that Clara had built is a perfect complement to what Groove had built in this really interesting way where the amount of overlap was actually really small, but the amount of kind of synergy in areas where we could help each other was huge. So Andy and I spent an incredible amount of time. Most of the time, actually, it was so clear to me on the consolidation side or the complementary side of the suite that didn't spend that much. Right away, it became so clear. Most of the time was actually spent on, do we align on culturally? So it's a great place for the teams. The other stuff that's really important was really there because it felt like it was just too good of a match on the pure product side, where we knew right away. When I looked at it, I already talked to customers that use both. We were going to be able to provide value that was distinct and differentiated and already right at the start, but then over time at a really nice level. And that was so clear. It just became about everything else for me right away.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up, Chris, because I'll phrase this as a question. Most acquisitions do not succeed. It's pretty well known. And I'm sure that as you were weighing your options about what the best path forward was for Groove, you were looking at a lot of the data, a lot of the anecdotes around acquisitions and why they failed. You just mentioned a handful of things that gave you more confidence in why this acquisition or this partnership marriage with Clary was going to buck that trend. You mentioned the product fit, you mentioned the culture fit. Anything else that when you were evaluating the deal, you decided, yes, this is a risk worth taking, and I'm confident that the partnership between these companies is going to be a successful one?
Honestly, I would say the quality of person at Clary. So the total cycle for, from the start when we started the conversation to when the deal was closed was about 14 months. So it was a lot of time. We went to many dinners, joint customer dinners, events together. I was at those talking to people, trying to understand, would we have a winning team that would truly be in it to, collaborate to produce the best customer outcomes. And I got more and more conviction that the teams were well aligned to accomplish this. And that's where I got super excited because I do think it's really hard. We've been going through this. It's a lot of change, a lot of turbulence just because, for your customers, it's a big change and so on. So you need to know, it's the right people and we're all committed and everyone sees the vision and so on. And I think that, I'm super excited about, but I think it's all about the people side and are we all kind of aligned to make this work?
Yeah, the merit. I mean, the way that the people have just worked so seamlessly together and integrated so nicely has been very, very encouraging. So kudos to you, Chris, for building such a strong culture and for being the one who's made sure that those cultural components were one of the main ingredients in the mix to make sure that this worked. Something else you mentioned on the product side, and maybe a kind of a different way of thinking about this, is maybe less about product synergy and more about product philosophy. And what I mean by that is, sales engagement is not a new space. There are a handful of other players in the space that have been around for about as long as Groove. But you took a pretty different approach to sales engagement from the jump. I'm speaking out of turn here, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. My impression is that Groove was always very focused on the buyer experience. And I mean that in 2 ways. First, what matters most to the buyers of Groove, the technology, but then what matters to the buyers who are receiving sales engagement, emails, calls, LinkedIn, whatever, from users of Groove. So how did you think about the type of product that you were architecting, and how is it different from other sorts of trends that you saw in the sales engagement space?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One is I think it starts with, who are you targeting first and what do you know best? So I came from Google and I said, one of the first things we said is let's get, someone like Google to use this. And so we went after large enterprises first. I was actually more of an AE than an SDR. So we went after AEs first. So we just had a very different starting point. It all came down to, at the end of the day, how do we help our customers in the most important way? And I always felt, okay, we need to drive adoption. Like, people don't use it, it's not useful. So we built the product where they were. That was the first thing, where we were very different. We didn't even have a place where you could go log in. It was, when you're in your inbox, Groove assisted you there and helped you. That also helped us with AEs because they were less resistant, or they were more resistant to kind of go and learn something completely new and so on in some cases. So that was one thing where we were very different. The second is we said, people already made this investment into their CRM. We need to complement that rather than make them do everything twice. So we invested a lot of time into saying, okay, how can we leverage everything they already invested in and bring that into our product in a seamless way so that's easier to administer, and not only to start and onboard, but in the future. So you don't have to, every time you make a change, make it in two places and all these things. How do we make that super seamless so the reps are just enabled and it just makes sense. It's speaking their language. It has their most, up-to-date rules and ways they're thinking about their business and their playbook and so on, without the administrator just all day moving things around and copying things. So that was another big change that we just focused on from the beginning. At the end of the day, I think we just had this philosophy. We want to be best in one hill, and then we can always expand. So we said, we're only selling, at the beginning, we only sold to people that use Gmail and Salesforce and had a reasonable number of AEs. That was like it. And we said, anyone else isn't fit to start. And we said, let's build the absolute best product. And then we expanded out from there. But we really wanted to be great in one area rather than trying to be like okay for everyone.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because what you did not skate toward was more of this sales automation side of the house. A lot of SDR teams are, to be uncharitable, are kind of spray and pray, spam cannon, fire off as many emails as you can, cross your fingers, hope for the best. The way that you architected your product was, because you were starting with that AE use case in mind, it was much more about how are we going to help these users of our product do research, get the data they need, execute effective quality outreach. And what's so interesting is that this is the way the market has moved. You fast forward now to 2023, it's all about quality over quantity. It's all about resonance, research, strategy. And so it seems that Groove is pretty well positioned to help not just SDRs, but as you mentioned earlier, account executives, customer success, account managers, help them all execute a more strategic approach to prospecting, deal execution, customer retention, all of the different kind of workflows that from a buyer engagement standpoint seem to matter.
I was very stubborn on that point over the years. There was many deals where we could have won if we just added this one feature that allowed you to, instead of hitting your Gmail send limit, you could send 4,000 more emails per day, and it just didn't make any sense to me. And I felt it wasn't sustainable for the market. It was like we were enabling people to do bad practices, and I just felt that wasn't the right thing to do. We should make the best things faster so you can do more of them and be more effective and so on. But it shouldn't be this completely unscalable thing that's actually worse for your customers. And that's where we really tried to avoid. And when we had a choice, we never chose it because we just didn't want to go down that road, because I thought it would actually hurt the entire category if it went too far. So that was one thing. And then the second thing is, as a buyer as well, I just didn't think it was the most effective approach. I thought we should tackle the harder problems that maybe aren't, not everyone agrees on, but I think it's just a better approach. How can you get the most out of the best ways you can operate and do that faster? That was more of our approach from the beginning.
And I think you were somewhat prescient on this front, Chris, because what you predicted has borne out here. The sales engagement category is somewhat in the doghouse right now from a lot of buyers' perspectives. And a lot of people will say, quote unquote, the SDR model is dead. But what they really mean is the volume-based spray and pray approach to prospecting is dead or dying, at least. Hopefully it'll die soon. And Groove was never architected to allow for that. And so let's talk now, as vocal as I've seen individuals, sellers, SDRs, AEs, CSMs, AEs, as vocal as I've seen them be about Groove the product, I've seen as much enthusiasm from revenue operations and sales operations people for Groove, the product. Why? Like, tell us why.
That's a good question. I think it's because from day one, I really care about revenue. For whatever reason, it's like a passion of mine. I could, create my own random automation to help the team. I just really think it's an incredibly important area. And I think there's so many ways to empower them to provide more value for their users or their stakeholders ultimately. And from day one, we started thinking about that. So I used to write these, random posts about, oh, here's how you can do this thing in Salesforce, so I'll help you. And these types of small changes really make a big difference for them. So there's many parts of our product where from day one, we were like, how do we make this better for RevOps? And a lot of it's reflected in the product, just the fact that we're trying to eliminate all the work similar for sales reps that isn't very meaningful and frankly isn't the best use of time, and just get rid of it. None of this field mapping and all this other stuff. And instead, so they can focus on the most important strategic elements. How do we organize so everyone in the company has the right content strategy? How do we think about our strategy? How do we, look at our data in a way that's useful or share it in the right way? So the higher level questions rather than just administration things. So we're always looking to remove those things. And I think we did that probably more than many companies, but it was partially because I just think it's the right way to build for this category, because there's so many interesting problems people should be spending time on.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And certainly my experience with Groove has been from an operational perspective. You mentioned earlier, Groove was architected from day one to complement the CRM, not duplicate it and create another contact center that somebody had to try and administer and then try and marry up Salesforce and this other kind of shadow CRM that gets created. So you eliminate that. You also allow for all the roles and hierarchies and permissions to be completely imported from Salesforce and matched in Groove, so the administration of that is just way easier. And then there's, like what you said before, all the productivity gains that you end up having because you're automating data capture, you're automating all the menial or mundane work that is just not worth anybody's time, whether that's an individual seller or a RevOps person that has to go and clean up on the back end. You're automating all that and you're making it reliable. And so for that reason, it's just a more reliable solution to a critical part of the revenue process that, if it's not managed in this way, can lead to a lot of revenue leak that's happening, whether you don't have the right data from different point solutions, or your sales reps are losing time to productivity, or you can't actually see what's happening at the top of funnel or middle of the funnel. And that's revenue leak everywhere. Let's talk now about kind of the joint vision of Clari and Groove. What's exciting to you about the future as you put on your product hat and you think about how are we going to join forces now that we're officially one company? What's exciting to you?
Wow, there is a lot. I think just a few specifics to go into. One is we had spent more than a year investing in plays. I always had this issue with kind of sales engagement. The first generation was linear workflows, call, email,
Yep.
but it should have been more dynamic because the world is, messier, and it should have been you set up rules, and then at any time the system is assisting you and saying, oh, we detect all these things have happened, go do X, so, and you could drive this process everywhere. Like I remember I used to at Google, we'd go to this long, revenue kickoff and go through 200 slides and then go back to work. And then you'd forget almost everything and you would never know, are we executing the playbook or not? And that is just fascinating. It's just a really interesting problem. And people don't even have visibility into that today. Did the play that you want happen on time, the way you want it every time? No, and you normally can see, was there an email or not, and that's it. So that's one area I'm super excited about, and that's where Clari and Groove together is super powerful, because RevDB is all about snapshotting, understanding changes and differences, and this is perfect for that, because you need to understand what changed or did not change and what should we do about it. And in this combination, I'm incredibly excited about. The second is on the analytic insight front. I think, again, the combination of everything Clary has built to date around RevDB and snapshotting and understanding the historics and what the forecast or prediction is based on that is exactly what our customers were looking for a long time. They always understood, looking back, because that's what our analytics was focused on. Did we send the emails? Did we make the calls? All this. But really what people want to know is, based on my pipeline goal for this year, are we trending the right way? If we have a gap, what's it looking like and what should I do about it? And like thinking about things in the future rather than the past is a thing, the combination of the companies I think can come together and really unleash insights for customers so that they can have more control over their entire process, which I think is what every company is trying to do. Just more control over their growth and just better, control over the whole revenue system or function. And I think that is going to be really awesome when that all comes together.
It's really well said, Chris. And I'll try and summarize here. Forgive me if I miss. The exciting thing is Clary is a system of insight. It's powered by the revenue database, which is our unified data model. That's snapshotting CRM, that's pulling in data from all the deals you're working, from your calendar, from your email, everything, and collating that into a single database. That then is giving sellers, sales teams, revenue leaders best practices for what needs to happen when in what deal. Now, those insights standalone are valuable, but again, in the life before Groove, we didn't really have a system to say you can now go act on those insights right in the flow of work. Now with Groove, we have those insights and we have the action that you can take on them right in the same platform, which creates this closed loop between what needs to happen and what is happening. And as you said, this is helping companies say, not just what happened in the past and, let's go and try and figure out, diagnose the past, but rather what happened in the past, easy to understand. What do we need to go do right now to either close a gap or to double down on an advantage or whatever it may be? And that to me is what's so exciting about the combination of Clary and Groove, is that closed loop between insight and action.
Yeah. There's definitely going to be a lot of really unique kind of innovation we can bring to the market together that will be very beneficial and hopefully give all of our customers a competitive advantage in their own revenue process.
Cannot wait. Okay. Any advice to any CEOs who are considering an M&A, who are considering going through this? What are maybe some of the top lessons you've learned over the last 14, 15 months?
Well, first of all, I think there's this common saying, companies are bought, not sold. I do think that's real. Like, I can't imagine going through that process if you had no cash left or whatever it may be. That would have been really hard because it's a very emotional, hard thing to do. For me, we had about 200 employees, Groovers, we called them. And, you want to make sure, hey, it's a good home for people. There's the right change. Strategically, it makes sense for your investors. So there's a lot to think through. And I do think you need the time and you need to be able to go deep enough with the other side to say, okay, this makes sense, because you want to make it, work. And to do that, you got to do your diligence, just like I think finding an investor. I think in general, it's probably not the right approach to just the first person that gives you a term sheet to take it and save money is money and so on. I do think people matter a lot, and who you go on the journey with matters a lot. So I think taking your time to figure that out is totally worth it. But to do that, you had to have earned that. You had to have earned the ability to take, enough time to look through the strategic options. And then the second thing is, I would say, for us, any situation, you got to try to be as objective as you can, because you do have employees and shareholders and everything. In our case, the market was changing. This consolidation was happening, and I felt it was the right move for the company. And if I'd have been too emotionally attached to one path, I think that can be very dangerous. There's always this saying, your startup's your baby. I never really felt that way, but I do think there's this element where you could get tied up, and maybe that clouds your decision making. Where you're thinking about things not as objectively as you need to be. And I think that would be the second thing, is just making sure you're constantly saying, okay, why am I making or thinking about these decisions, and constantly checking that, because I do think that's an easy area where you could kind of go the wrong way purely based on your emotions or being tied to something in the past or whatever it may be.
Yeah, really well said, Chris. Unsurprisingly, very thoughtful, very nuanced. Chris, where can people go to learn more about you? Where can people go to learn more about the future of Clarion Groove?
I'm not really on social media or anything. I am on LinkedIn, but that's it. And other than that, I think Clary.com and check out, this podcast. I think you and the team have done an amazing job of creating great content. And I think that's what I hope we continue to do is build really useful content that truly is engaging and in making everyone better at their craft. So any place where you can find that type of content, and I think is super important. And other than that, Clary.com.
Beautiful. All right. Last question for you. I ask every guest, what's one book that you would recommend to the listeners that's had some sort of impact on your life or your career? It could be a business book. It could be a novel. It could be a book of poetry, whatever. I'm curious to hear what's the one book you would point out.
I think if I was thinking just right now, I don't remember names of books that well. I think it's The Score Takes Care of Itself. It's the Bill Walsh book. But basically, it's this idea of, you got to focus on all the different parts of getting better rather than just the score and the ending of something. And this is how I've always worked. And I do think if you're thinking long term, that is the right approach. There's been points in my career where I could have made more money doing X, or I could have learned more by doing Y, and being pushed by an earlier mentor to focus on Y and think long term and kind of think about the compounding nature of that, of 10 years out, you'll be in a different spot. I think doing that at every step and really enjoying the practice of getting better, I think is really important. And for me, one story we didn't talk about, when we left, we actually spent 2 years at the beginning just coding all day, my co-founder and I, because we wanted to make sure we could create the technology ourselves. So we did that. And then, over time, we got pretty good. And then, but ultimately it's changed the way I view every part of the business, because I can go much deeper on many things. And some people would think that's a kind of a weird, strange investment and you should focus just on one thing. But I think being able to go deep in many areas that are critical and spending sufficient time. I see people kind of jumping off of things too early before they get the benefit of the investment. I think those are the things. And that's what I thought of when I think of that book, is it's just constantly on the journey, doing all the little things, constantly questioning things, constantly trying to get better. And then in the end, you look back and you go, oh, wow, that worked out fairly well. And I think, that I do think is the right way to think about things, because there's a lot of times where you're pushed in life to only think about the score and you'll cut corners and so on. And you're not even learning the lessons that would get you to, get a better score at the next level and so on. So I think that's a book that I like to read, and I think it's really well done.
Good stuff, Chris. And not surprising at all, given how you unpacked, what is the purpose of Groove from a technology standpoint? It's to facilitate that kind of thoughtfulness, that don't cut corners. Let's do the work the right way. That's going to be good for your learning path. That's going to be good for your buyers. So I'm not at all surprised to hear that that's been an impactful book for you. Thank you so much for the time. Chris Rothstein, co-founder, CEO of Groove, now a member of the Clary team, leading all things Groove internally. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It's been awesome. Thanks for having me, Kyle.
All right. That is a wrap for this episode of the Run Revenue Show. As always, please like, rate, and subscribe. Tell your friends, tell your family, coerce them to listen, and we will be back next week with another episode.
Don't let what you heard today go to waste. Take 2 minutes to download today's checklist to get your priorities in line for the week. You can find that linked in our show notes. And if you liked what you heard, make sure you give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. We'll be back next Monday with more to help you win your week.